HarperCollins presents We All Go Into the Dark, The Hunt for Bible John by Francisco Garcia, read by Angus King. Prologue. There was a moment in the mid-1970s, a fragile, vanishing moment, when it must have seemed like the future was coming to Stonehouse. The sleepy South Lanarkshire village sits around half an hour's drive southeast of Glasgow, on the banks of the Avon Water, the picturesque river that snakes its way across Scotland's inner west coast before eventually running into the River Clyde by a nameless stretch of land just off the M74 motorway. Though surrounded by rolling green hills, the main body of the village itself occasionally carries a heavy-set feeling of isolation, depending on the season. There are times under the winter rain, for instance, when the rows of thin grey buildings appear to be bleeding, as if slashed by an unseen knife. Stonehouse has had its own modest claims to renown over a long and occasionally difficult history. From the mid-18th century, it was synonymous with the output of its weavers and, in particular, for their work with silk, including the fine scarves and handkerchiefs produced for export to India. A century later, it was often said by local observers that the patterns spun by a Stonehouse master were more delicate than anything that had ever been conceived of before in Scotland. These boom years saw the village expand, with entire new streets of handsome, privately built cottages arriving to support its growing population. Many of these buildings endure. Hill Road, Camnethan Street, and Queen Street exist almost unchanged to this day, as part of the village's proudly maintained and manicured conservation area. The decline, when it unfolded, was gradual rather than precipitous. Despite the damage wrought by advancing technology, there were plenty of handloom weavers who still persisted in the old ways. They adapted, or tried to adapt as best they could, until even the guarantee of their craftsmanship was no protection against the heavy, inexorable march of progress. By the end of the 19th century, coal mining had begun to dominate, until it too bedded down into a joyless, terminal decline. The last colliery in the area was shut in 1958, though its legacy is felt to this day in the twisted bones of the subsiding properties in its vicinity. The close of the decade marked the shift into a new world, riven with uncertainty. It wasn't tough to catch the melancholic symbolism a year later, with the death of the last weaver in Lanarkshire, 84-year-old James Hamilton of Camnethan Street, Stonehouse. The following years saw a sense of isolation set in. For some, this was a source of comfort, the retreat into a blanket of well-worn custom, where change remained a process to be measured in reassuringly gradual increments, running into one another unseen over the blurred weeks and months, the long years and decades. But Stonehouse never quite became a tomb. It wasn't unheard of for people to still move to the village and make their lives there, though few ever made the mistake of considering themselves anything other than benignly tolerated outsiders. To truly be from Stonehouse remained a question of generational roots, of being able to trace the thread back, right back, into the dimly lit or otherwise forgotten past. One might live, work, and drink there for decades, but without that thread, one might only ever achieve a foreigner's status. This was due to change on the 10th of May 1976, the day that the future was officially unveiled in Stonehouse. 30 years earlier had seen the publication of the Clyde Valley Regional Plan, a visionary argument in favour of easing Glasgow's perilous housing crisis by decamping a quarter of its million inhabitants into freshly constructed new towns.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?